Hi and welcome to this latest immigration law update video. And this is one of my immigration law conversations, and I'm joined not by one but by two guests today. Diana Harris is a returning guest. She's a sucker for punishment and has come back for another conversation. Diana Harris is an independent social worker. And I'm also joined by Dr. Leonie Campbell today, who's a chartered psychologist. So thank you both so much for joining me today.
Thanks for having us.
Hello, Adam.
No, it's really good to have you. And just remember, these are not legal advice. We hope to discuss some legal issues. We hope to provide some helpful information, but they're not legal advice. They're informal conversations. So, Leonie, you're the newcomer today, so let's go to you. Just tell us a bit about who you are and what you do.
Well, my name's Dr. Leonie Campbell. I'm a psychologist. I have my own expert witness company now called Psychology for Success. We deal with expert witness as well as other parts of psychology. My background in psychology is occupational counselling, but counselling psychologists work within social services and health in clinical psychology roles. So we do the same roles. And my background is in learning disabilities. So I do a lot with cognitive psychological assessments, which runs across the thread of most individuals that I see. So it's always some kind of neurodevelopmental disorder linked with another psychological condition. So that's usually how I will get involved in cases like this, as well as some of the associates that now work for me.
No, that's great. No, that's fantastic. And I'll come back and pick up on a couple of those things in a minute. Okay. Diana, in case anybody doesn't know you, tell us a bit about you and what you do.
Hi, I'm an independent social worker. My background was in fostering. In 2016, I branched out into independence and started working with people with unsettled immigration status, and have developed my skills and experience since then. In 2018, I launched my company, which is Harris Associates Immigration Social Work Services, and we're a consultancy providing expert witness independent social workers for immigration cases.
So obviously we're talking about immigration law today. Dana, in terms of social work reports, what sort of cases do social workers get involved in reporting on? And then I'll come to Leonie and talk about psychology.
We will do assessments for children and families, unaccompanied young people, adults and older people, and that can incorporate people with mental health issues and care needs, looking at social circumstances, best interests of children and adults, and the impact of a specified change.
No, that's really helpful. And Leonie, what about you? When would I need to instruct a psychologist, for example, or when would a psychologist be helpful in an immigration case?
Okay, so we will usually provide cognitive, so that's the about the thinking side and maybe learning disability side, or the psychological, which is mainly around their mental health and well-being. So they might have some kind of psychological condition. But with immigration, it's usually around areas like facing return to an unsafe situation. So we might need to be looking at post-traumatic stress disorder and maybe where they've fled from and what the impact on their mental health could be with regards to their return. And these things could be linked to trauma, also linked to even being here. So what now they're here dealing with things like maybe domestic violence, torture, prosecution, even suffering from deprivation, and how that may have led to some level of stress disorder or psychological disorder. So the expert witness, usually who are psychologists, we will support you to identify the kind of diverse presentations, how give you a picture of how everything maps together for you to understand what the impact of them could be on their return for their well-being and mental health. We also deal maybe with immigration and crime and displacement and the impact of that. There's a lot of underreporting of women with regards to domestic abuse, and then, you know, even issues with regards to things like grooming and getting themselves into difficult situations where they're scared to be able to disclose what's happening to them due to fear of deportation. So, you know, we're able to do validated psychological assessment to actually look at the levels of distress, actually look at and do in-depth psychological interviews as well, to gain a good understanding of this person, to understand their situation and the impact of this displacement on them. We also deal a lot with immigration and family and looking at divided carers. You know, what will be the impact of if a family is split up on the person who stays behind and also on the person that might need to leave. And I also explained to you that, you know, we do cognitive assessments a lot. So sometimes there is also a cognitive difficulty that runs through this thread of having a psychological condition. So it could be that the person could also be autistic, have attention deficit, have a learning disability, so quite a low cognition, and actually looking at how the complexity of how that links up with what's happening to them or what has happened to them, and actually what it would mean for them to return and what it would mean for them to stay. So, you know, what we tend to do in our reports is present you with a number of hypotheses. Mm-hmm. So that helps you to make a decision as, you know, as to, you know, what's in the best interest of these people. And also looking at, so one, either looking at the carer, so family carers, but also looking at if the person themselves has some kind of cognitive difficulty and what that could mean for them. Because sometimes when carers are divided and they're looking after someone who's got neurodevelopmental disorder, you have to think about the impact, not just on the family, but on society as well, and on social care. If maybe the family are split up, if they are managing to support the person. So what we offer is, you know, a validated assessment, an interview that you can rely on, is reliable and valid.
In terms of making your assessment, one of the issues I've come across a lot in recent cases is particularly perhaps UK citizens caring for elderly relatives who've perhaps come over from abroad and then had a downturn in their health, and that often we're turning for assessments looking at the effects of things like Alzheimer's and early onset dementia. Are those the sort of I can see you both nodding. Let's go to you first, Diana, then come back to you, Leonie. Is that something you've had experience with in terms of looking at somebody's capacity, perhaps even to give evidence? Yeah.
Well, from the social work perspective, I have done assessments of families where there is either one older person, so a parent, that's come over to join the family, and for whatever reason they're here and there's been a deterioration of health and they need the support, or perhaps they're on their own and there is nobody else to care for them. So from the social work perspective, my assessment would focus on the relationships within the family, but also the dependence of that person on the wider family that are caring for them. But probably specifically the relationships that they've made with, you know, their grandchildren and the rest of the family in the time that they've been here. That would tend to be where I would focus and my experience in that area.
That's helpful, actually. And you can see how a social worker and a psychologist can complement each other, because you're looking at how the relationships, the level of dependency, the family makeup. If I needed to have an assessment on capacity, is that something I'd come to you for, Leonie, and say, if I've got an adult foreign national who's, say, now got signs of dementia and reliant on their carer here in the UK, is that something I'd come to you for, Leonie, in terms of an assessment of capacity?
Yeah. So we can do a capacity assessment. So we can look at so usually when you look at dementia, sometimes you will look at the person's level of cognition, but then you will also, we have separate dementia assessments that we can undertake, like validated tests. And so that will actually be able to tell you in a space in time about their level of capacity. Mm-hmm. And usually, dependent on the time frame, you can retest to look for decline as well. So that tells you information about the rate of decline and whether capacity is changing as well. And also around the relationship that they have, a bit like social care, but looking at the impact of that relationship on their psychological well-being. Because when it comes to dementia, there are issues of memory and forgetting, obviously, and space and time. So dependent how far gone their cognition is, there are issues around actually what the impacts are of moving them on their well-being. And what things are being done to stimulate their remembering and forgetting. And if there are strategies that are put in place, that's well and good. But if those strategies are linked to people, then it's looking at the impact of the change in that and their level of distress and their capacity to understand the change, what's going to happen to them. And if that's going to increase their level of distress by, making particular changes in their whole environment. So that will be able to.
That's really helpful. And just to clarify something, because I think a lot of perhaps solicitors or advisors sometimes wrestle with this question, is when to be instructing a psychologist and when to be instructing a psychiatrist. Just help us out perhaps in how you differentiate in which you would use.
Okay, so sometimes I even recommend for a psychiatric assessment. If I think that, for example, there's a mental health condition and it's being controlled by medication, maybe that medication hasn't been reviewed, or it doesn't seem to be working because I'm still seeing that there's a presentation, I'd recommend for a psychiatric assessment. Psychiatrists, they support, we work very closely together, but they prescribe. And so they're the ones that will observe the changes in behavior and how the person responds to medication. So if there was a need for that, then that's something that I would recommend a psychiatrist to be used for. If you want to fully diagnose, like say somebody who doesn't have a diagnosis of dementia, for example, then usually the final diagnosis a lot of the time falls in teams that I've worked with. Usually we do all of the observations and we make the diagnosis, but then we will speak with the psychiatrist at the end who will finalize that. So sometimes that's another recommendation. If there hasn't been a formal diagnosis made, then I would recommend that a psychiatrist observes that, what's been done so far to make that formal diagnosis if there's going to be some kind of continuation of care.
Yeah, that's really helpful, because I think having a formal diagnosis to present either to the Home Office within an application or to a judge within an appeal is so important in able to establishing your case. Obviously,
can I just add something there, please, Adam?
Yeah.
Just to say that there are social workers that do specialise in mental capacity assessments as well. But I personally am a children and family social worker, so therefore I wouldn't get involved in that personally.
I think that raises an important point, doesn't it? When instructing an expert, whether it's a psychologist, a psychiatrist, or a social worker, it's making sure the person you instruct is an expert on what you want. Because so often I see that as something that causes reports to get less value either before the Home Office or before a judge. And just building on that, what common problems, Dana, do you come across in terms of when you get instructions? What are the things, the sort of common problems? How can people help you in getting the most out of you? And I'll come to you in a moment, Leonie. How, because people are paying for your services, you want the most bang for your buck. How can they get the most out of your reports? What are the problems you get?
I would say there's two main issues that I come across. The first one is that the instructions are to complete an independent social work assessment, and that's the instructions. But for me, that is so wide, and you could focus on numerous areas. So it's really important to discuss your instructions and negotiate your instructions so that they're relevant to the information that you want at the end of it. So it's, you know, having that discussion about what it is that you want to know, what is going to be useful for you at the end of this in your case, but what can I deliver? What can I produce? What can I focus on? So it's really important to just clarify what it is you want, because I don't know what's in your head and you don't know what's in my head. I might think I know what you mean, but it may be completely different. And the other thing is just having all the information that is available. Quite often I'll get instructions and there's nothing at all. But normally, you know, there is a bundle and there is previous refusals or report medical history or and any other information, you know, that is relevant to the case. And it is, no matter how unimportant it might seem to the legal professional, it might be really significant to me as in my social work report. So any information that you've got at all, give it us, and you know, we can not use it or use it. So those would be the two main things that I would say.
Yeah, I think that's so important, that clear instructions, that you have a discussion to narrow down exactly, and both of you know where you're coming from, and also that full information, because so many reports I've seen and judges go mad because the professional hasn't seen the last judge's decision and is taking a totally different starting point from which the tribunal has to. So, you know, anything to add, Leonie? I can see you nodding furiously in the background. Yeah, anything to add on that one?
I would just say that not having information makes a really big decision to your opinion. Because, you know, you can report on what you've seen, but if you've forgotten or not given information about particular issues or, you know, attachment or whatever it might be, actually, you know, we're never going to report on that because we don't know about it. So I think that the first part is about agreeing what the questions are. And that, you know, a lot of the time when I work with solicitors, the LOI gets sent to me and then I call them and we have a conversation about these questions. And we talk about, you know, exactly what are you trying to achieve? There, you know, a lot of the time it'll be broadly what, you know, we want a cognitive and a psychological assessment, but there's no information about the person. So under practice direction 10, that you're supposed to give all relevant information. We get sometimes a lot of cherry picking of information. So sometimes, you know, what I will do is just ask about actually what is happening here. And once I understand that, then I can get a good feel for what needs, you know, what information that I can ask for, because sometimes it's not always given. So I think another thing is around having a very up-to-date bundle, because if you're giving me something and you've been trying to get this approved for 2 months, a lot happens in that time. And if things have been reviewed and I've not been given the review information, I need to have all of that information. I need to see if there's been any change. So I think that's important. And also that any changes that we agree on the letter of instruction are revised. Because I think that a lot of the time, you know, the solicitor will agree or not. I think it can happen that they agree. And then, you know, you present your responses, but then it will look to the judge as if you haven't answered the question because the discussion or the change in the questions has not been captured. So then it makes it look as though the expert hasn't responded to what's been asked. Whereas quite a detailed discussion has been had, and that's not been revised anyway. So I think those things are really important to me. Agreeing on the questions, having that discussion to make sure the questions are right, making sure the information is up to date, and that all changes have been captured.
No, absolutely. I think that's so important to have that discussion so you can capture the correct question, and then the report is answering the question asked. And I was just reminded, actually, since we last had our video conversation, Diana, the Court of Appeal published a judgment called H.A. Iraq, and that's probably the most significant case in terms of deportation cases this year. And for practitioners, if you haven't read the judgment at the end from Lord Justice Peter Jackson, I'd really encourage you. He's a family law judge, so that's his background, and an expert on the best interests of children. And he makes the point at paragraph 155 about when the court comes to assess the best interests of children, it has to be adequately informed and specific to the individual child. And if you've got that good expert report with those formulated questions that have all the information, that's going to aid the court in making that assessment. So, and also, by the way, when looking, have a look at paragraph 156 of HA Iraq, because what Lord Justice Peter Jackson says there is often, sometimes the courts have fallen down by not looking at the individual child and looking at children generally, and actually prioritizing physical harm over emotional harm. And all those things are things we can address in a good expert report. We're recording this just before Christmas in 2020. Obviously, we're in a fluid lockdown situation, but just briefly, guys, before we come to an end, how are you carrying out your assessments at the moment, just practically? Dana, what about you? How are you undertaking assessments at the moment?
Okay, well, the virus and the lockdowns that we've been experiencing on and off since March has actually developed my skills and most social workers' skills, most professionals' skills, certainly in the technology that we're using today. But also we've had to learn how to do assessments slightly differently and not in person. So the first thing is everything's done remotely at this moment in time. And we have to be a lot more organised because of that. So forms and children's questionnaires, exercises, all those kinds of things we're sending out in advance, discussing the preparation for the assessment in advance. There's a lot more preparation altogether. What I will do now is interview the parents or carers initially before speaking to them with their children, and that gives them the opportunity of anything that they don't want to discuss in front of the children that's not appropriate for them to hear. They're still getting the opportunity, they're getting the opportunity to have that conversation, whereas before I probably would have done that in a separate phone call if I'd done a home visit. So it's just making sure that they're getting those opportunities still. Observation is a little bit more difficult in the sense of, as social workers, we consider the environment, and that can be things like making sure that the family's got the basic things that they need, like cooking equipment, you know, food in the kitchen, fridge, things like that. And you don't see that if you're not physically visiting. So now I might ask them to do a walk around or send me some photographs of the main areas of the house, like the bathroom, kitchen, lounge, just so that I'm still getting that information. Also work with children, I've had to develop icebreakers that you can do through video to get them to relax. But the great thing about children is they're very adaptable and very versatile, and they've probably accepted this more than we have. Absolutely. So yeah, we have changed.
And what about you, Leonie? How do you conduct sort of psychological assessments? Perhaps if you're using assessment tools, how do you do it at present?
Yeah, so we are mainly working remotely. There's been a few cases where we've seen the client face to face, but we have had information from the British Psychological Society, as well as a number of test publishers that have they've gone through with us adaptations for making the test remote. So we've even been able to remove, there's a couple of the cognitive tests where you have to use bricks, and obviously if you're remote you can't use the bricks. What some psychologists are doing is sending the bricks out by courier, and then the return courier collects it within 3 hours. So they just put the bricks back in and then they send it back. So we've found ways around it. And the courier even, they send the bricks, and there's 2 papers that they'll need to fill out for the test. So that comes by the courier comes collected it. But then we can also remove a couple of the subtests, and we'll replace them with a few other ones, additional tests that we already have within the same suite. So we've gone through with the test publishers and made those decisions about what still gives reliable data. And the tests are already validated, but we're just using different scales. So we've been able to do a lot of those things, which means that actually the test is still reliable. Even the screen sharing is actually helping a lot. And I think it actually helps a lot with the children assessments, because you know, you share the screen, but they're able to write on the screen. If they feel that there's something that they don't actually want to talk about, they write in the chat box. We can, you know, as psychologists, we can now talk about the colors that they use to color in the screen. And actually, you know, I think that we're getting a lot more quality data. You're actually able to observe a lot. And usually the assessments are usually done in quite a controlled environment. So if they're either at a center or, you know, somewhere where it's just controlled, but because they're somewhere where they're a lot more relaxed, you're able to see a lot about what's happening, the dynamics with the family or where they're living and what's actually happening for them. And it's also easier to have a lot more appointments with them. So you're getting a lot more data. So you can even split the appointments down into shorter and just do 45 minutes, but they're happy to see you more often. And you can be a little bit more flexible now, actually, because you don't have an issue of distance and also having to get the hours approved for travel.
That's really helpful, that some people may think that lockdown perhaps and remote assessments decrease the value of the assessments, but actually it may be allowing you guys to do more and have more interaction with the clients and actually see more and do more. Just an ironic story. I was told by a colleague this week that the Home Office had said to a judge, well, you can't rely on I think it was a social work assessment because it was done online, even though the court proceedings were online and the judge was doing his assessment online. So that they missed the irony there. So yeah, guys, we've chatted a while now. If people want to get in touch with you, ask some questions, see if you can get involved in a particular case or an assessment, how do they do that? And also, one or both of you, I know you've got some opportunities of webinars and things you're doing where people might be able to get involved with you and ask more questions. Let's turn to you, Diana, first. Yeah.
Okay, so if anybody wants to discuss a case where they're considering an independent social work report, you can contact me on info@immigrationsocialwork.co.uk or telephone. I think the number will be up at the end of this, and we can have a discussion to discuss what the needs are. And Harris Associates has social workers with experience and specialisms in different areas to myself as well. So there might be somebody that's better suited than me. But yes, we are planning to do a free webinar, and that will be around making the most of your expert witness reports. Myself and Leonie are collaborating on that, and the first free webinar will be the 5th of February 2021, and I'll pass you over to Leonie because she's got the details on her website for that.
That's fantastic, Leonie. How do people get in touch with you? I will put all your details, and yeah, tell us a bit more about the webinar before we finish.
Yeah, so if you want to get in contact with me, please do at info@psychologyforsuccess.co.uk. At the end, I think you're going to provide a phone number as well, which you can also contact.
It'll be all below the video.
And website, which is www.psychologyforsuccess.co.uk. Now that's where you can go to find information for the webinar that we're going to be doing on the 5th of February. So please complete the contact form there, and we will provide you with some information after Christmas about what's going to happen with that, and we will sign you up and send you a link because it will be remote. Okay.
No, that's really helpful.
Just like thank you. Just like Diana, my associates have different specialisms from me. So, you know, I've talked a lot about cognition and maybe some of the things that I do, but, you know, everyone has their own specialism in their expertise. So do fill out the contact form on our website as well, giving us a bit of information about what you might like from us, or email, and we can see if we can match you up with some of our associates. And we're more than happy to go through the CVs with you in detail, and get a feel of what it is that you want to make sure that it's the right expert for you.
No, I think that's so important, and something that's come across through all our conversation is about having a discussion with the expert so you can get the right expert and ultimately the most effective expert report. So I'd encourage people to have a look at the contact details, which will be below this video, and also sign up for the webinar on the 5th of February 2021. And guys, will there be a chance to sort of interact with you on that webinar so people can ask questions and say, I've got this type of case, what do you recommend? Obviously, you can't give specific advice on the webinar, but if they have specific, say, what sort of expert do I need for this case? Is that the sort of thing they'll be able to come and discuss with you on the webinar?
Yeah, yes, we'll be going a little bit more in depth about all the things that we've talked about today, but there will be some interactive sessions. So we are planning to do breakout rooms and, you know, have some more in-depth discussions, so that we can hear from you as well as you hear from us, and you know, work together so that we know what you want, and that'll enable us to work better in the future. Leonie?
Yeah, and I think that I want, you know, what we're going to do is we're going to make sure that you have an understanding of how to use us. So that's the main thing, you know, how to use us and how to choose us.
Yeah, no, I like that. That's fantastic. Well, on that note, thank you so much, both of you, for giving up your time today. Thank you for talking to us, and hopefully that webinar will be a great success and people can come along, get to know you guys, ask some more questions, and then, you know, be able to get good quality reports which will help them and help their clients. So thank you so much, guys. Thank you and goodbye.
You're welcome, and it's a pleasure, Adam. Thank you.
No problem at all.
Thanks for having me. Thanks for having us.